He was once the favourite of Henry VIII, but after falling from grace, he suffered a miserable death and the ignominy of his grave being quickly lost. This is the story of what happened to Thomas Wolsey, from his wretched end, including, brace yourselves, details of what he was depositing in his chamber pot in the last days of his life, to his low-key burial, the explanation as to how his remains were lost, the story that they were relocated in the 17th century, and whether they could ever be found and positively identified again. Just before we jump in, please remember to give the video a like if you enjoy it and subscribe to my channel with the notification bell switched on so you never miss an upload. You can also join my YouTube membership for extra perks or find me over on Patreon where I release even more bonuses including early access to ad-free videos and extra podcasts. The link is below for you, as is one to my website where you can sign up to my free mailing list and get 2 complimentary downloads right away. The year is 1530, and Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, once the favourite minister of Henry VIII and the second most powerful person in England, has largely fallen from grace with the king thanks to his inability to get Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled by the Pope, so that the king can marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn. Wolsey is now about 59 years old and has been ill off and on for many months, thinking himself near death in December 1529 and so unwell again in January 1530 that the king, who hadn't yet totally abandoned him at that point, even sent his own doctors to him. He has been stripped of many of his offices and wealth, yet despite these setbacks, there have been signs during the year that Henry's attitude towards him is softening. The king sent him furniture and a pardon in February, and he has been restored to the bishopric of York so that he remains comparatively wealthy. In April, he starts travelling north to visit that city, stopping off at other places along the way, and by the end of September he is at Cawood Castle near to York. Within weeks, though, Henry will turn on him completely. By the start of November, the cardinal is suspected of conspiring with the Spanish and the French against the king in order to prevent the marriage to Anne, and he is arrested for treason at Cawood on the 4th of November, with orders that he be brought back to London. He is likely facing imprisonment and possible execution. He won't make it that far, though. Wolsey leaves on the 6th of November, travelling first to Pontefract, then Doncaster, then arriving at the 4th Earl of Shrewsbury's house at Sheffield Park on the 8th. His health is now failing him again, and he is suffering from dysentery and, no doubt, extreme anxiety. He remains there for 16 days until the 24th. During his stay, he is joined by William Kingston, Constable of the Tower of London, who arrives on the 22nd of November, seemingly confirming that the Tower is indeed the destination awaiting Wolsey in London. The Cardinal has only days to live, though. We have a detailed description of these final days from one of his servants, George Cavendish, who later wrote a biography of Wolsey. Now, this biography was only composed between 1554 and 1558, so while Cavendish is a great source because he was an eyewitness to Wolsey's decline and death, and perhaps he had old letters or memorandums written back in 1530 to jog his memory, the source is not as strong or reliable as it would have been had it been written close in time to the events it was describing. We must allow that even with some additional contemporary notes, which may or may not have existed, Cavendish's memory will not have been as sharp in the mid to late 1550s about events which had happened a quarter of a century earlier. We must also allow for his bias. As one of Wolsey's servants, he showed an evident desire to paint his long-dead master in a favourable light, and historian A.S.G. Edwards has noted that Cavendish may have been drawn to compose his life as a response to the hostile portrait of Wolsey that appeared in Edward Hall's Chronicle, first published in 1548. More on Hall later, as we'll look at that source too. Still, despite the biography's flaws, it is the best account of Wolsey's death and burial we have, and has been the basis for much of the scholarship on his demise written since. We pick up Cavendish's tale during Wolsey's stay at Lord Shrewsbury's home, where he recalls that Wolsey looked unwell by then. He was in low spirits and complained of trapped wind, sending Cavendish to the local apothecary to inquire of him whether he had anything that would break wind upwards. A remedy was provided, which did indeed cause the cardinal to bring much wind upward. He was soon afterwards seized with a lask, though, which I think means lax, or in modern parlance diarrhea, especially as Cavendish later calls it a flux. When Kingston arrived, he showed great respect to Wolsey, assuring him that the king, quote, beareth you as much goodwill and favour as ever he did, and that he and the 24 guards he had with him were just there to escort Wolsey back to London in safety, and at a pace which Wolsey could set himself, with his own servants attending him the whole way. It was true that Henry had heard reports that the cardinal had committed certain heinous crimes against him, but he didn't really believe the accusations and was only sending for him to come to trial as that was the law. Wolsey assured Kingston that if it was not for his flux he would have written out immediately, but he seems to have known that his situation was more dire than the constable of the Tower was letting on, thanking him for his kindness towards him, but saying, all these comfortable words which ye have spoken be but for a purpose to bring me into a fool's paradise. Now, while Cavendish says that Wolsey was ill before Kingston even arrived, Edward Hall, who was writing earlier but who was not an eyewitness, has a slightly different take on the situation, saying that when the cardinal saw the captain of the guard, he was sore astonished and shortly became sick, for he then perceived some great trouble toward him, and for that cause men said that he willingly took so much quantity of strong purgation that his nature was not able to bear it. All sources are at least agreed that by this point Thomas Wolsey was a very ill man, and the night that Kingston arrived, Cavendish says that the cardinal continued to be ill with the flux, constantly running to his stool, meaning his privy stool or toilet. He also provides the rather disgusting detail that the next day, quote, he had above 50 stools, so that he was that day very weak. The matter which he voided was wondrous black, the which physicians call color adustine, and when he perceived it, he said to me, if I have not some help shortly, it will cost me my life. A doctor named Nicholas was called, who said that Wolsey would be dead in 4 or 5 days. Nevertheless, the day after that, he began riding with Kingston and his men towards London. They overnighted at Hardwicke Hall, which is apparently meant to mean Hardwicke upon Lyne in Nottinghamshire, not the famous house in Derbyshire, then headed for Nottingham, with Wolsey deteriorating the whole time. Finally, it was on to Leicester Abbey, which would prove to be the cardinal's final destination, for he was by now in such a bad way that he could barely stay on the mule that conveyed him there. When he arrived, he told the abbot, Father Abbot, I am come hither to leave my bones among you. He wasn't wrong. Wolsey went straight to bed and never rose from it again. The next morning, which was a Monday, Cavendish tells us that, as I stood by his bedside about 8 of the clock, the windows being close shut, having wax lights burning upon the cupboard, I beheld him, as meseemed, drawing fast to his end. He, perceiving my shadow upon the wall by his bedside, asked who was there. Sir, I am here, quoth I. How do you? Quoth he to me. Very well, sir, quoth I, if I might see your grace well. What is it of the clock? Said he to me. Forsooth, sir, said I, it is past 8 of the clock in the morning. 8 of the clock, quoth he, that cannot be. Rehearsing divers times, 8 of the clock, 8 of the clock, nay, nay. Quoth he at the last, it cannot be 8 of the clock, for by 8 of the clock ye shall lose your master, for my time draweth near that I must depart out of this world. With that, Master Dr. Pams, a worshipful gentleman, being his chaplain and ghostly father standing by, bade me secretly demand of him if he would be shriven, and to be in a readiness towards God, whatsoever should chance. At whose desire I asked him that question. What have you to do to ask me any such question, quoth he, and began to be very angry with me for my presumption, until at the last Master Doctor took my part and talked with him in Latin, and so pacified him. Cavendish now went to see William Kingston, who told him he had orders from the king to question Wolsey about £1,500 which could not be located at Calwood, and about where it had come from. Cavendish told him to ask Wolsey about it, as the man would soon be dead, and when Kingston did, the cardinal told him that the money had been borrowed from friends, not taken from the king, as was the suspicion, and that he would reveal in whose keeping it was the next day. He remained at death's door overnight, but asked for some meat to eat early the next morning, though when it was brought to him, he barely touched it before he remembered it was a fast day, and so wouldn't eat any more. He then made his confession and spoke to Kingston about 7 a.m. Here Cavendish gives a long deathbed speech, which I think we could safely assume he has padded out a little bit, as no one could remember this much information in this level of detail or write it all down as it was being spoken. I imagine the gist of it is correct though, but for reasons of time I'm just going to quote or summarise the main points here. According to him, Wolsey told Kingston that "My disease is such that I cannot live. I have had some experience in my disease, and thus it is. I have a flux with a continual fever, the nature whereof is this, that if there be no alteration with me of the same within 8 days, then must either ensue excoriation of the entrails, or frenzy, or else present death, and the best thereof is death. And as I suppose this is the 8th day, and if you see in me no alteration, then is there no remedy, although I may live a day or twain, but death, which is the best remedy of the 3. Kingston tried to rally his spirits and tell him that he could survive, but Wolsey replied that, "I see the matter against me, how it is framed, but if I had served God as diligently as I have done the king, he would not have given me over in my grey hairs. Howbeit, this is the just reward that I must receive for my worldly diligence and pains that I have had to do him service, only to satisfy his vain pleasure, not regarding my godly duty." He then asked to be commended to the king, who he said would risk half the realm rather than not get any part of his will or appetite, and told Kingston to tell Henry to have a vigilant eye to depress this new pernicious sect of Lutherans. Wolsey now had only minutes left, telling Kingston, "Farewell, I can no more, but wish all things to have good success. My time draweth on fast, I may not tarry with you. And forget not, I pray you, what I have said and charged you withal. For when I am dead, you shall peradventure remember my words much better." And even with these words, he began to draw his speech at length, and his tongue to fail, his eyes being set in his head, whose sight failed him. Then we began to put him in remembrance of Christ's passion, and sent for the abbot of the place to anneal him, who came with all speed, and ministered unto him all the service to the same belonging, and caused also the guard to stand by, both to hear him talk before his death, and also to witness of the same. And incontinent the clock struck 8, at which time he gave up the ghost, and thus departed he this present life. And calling to our remembrance his words the day before, how he said that at 8 of the clock we should lose our master, one of us looking upon another, supposing that he prophesied of his departure. His exact cause of death will never be known for sure. Cavendish's account makes it clear that Wolsey wasn't eating enough and wasn't holding in much of what he was consuming, leading to extreme weakness. That information made it back to court as well. On the 2nd of December, the Milanese ambassador, Agostino Scarpinello, told the Duke of Milan that "it is said that his right reverend lordship's indisposition was preceded by 2 very bad symptoms. When first arrested, owing to mental depression, he would take no food, nisi coactus, meaning unless forced, and then came flux, and he could not retain anything in his stomach." On the 4th of December, the imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis wrote to his boss, Emperor Charles V of Spain, to tell him of the death, adding that "at first the cardinal refused to take nourishment. Afterwards he took or was given something to hasten his end. On Monday the captain of the guard arrived to conduct him hither. Soon afterwards he was taken ill, lingered till Wednesday, and then prepared for his end like a good Christian." Now some of this is demonstrably untrue. Kingston had arrived on the 22nd of November. Wolsey did not die until the 29th. There were far more than 2 days between the two, and Chapuis has also omitted all the travelling they did in between those days. The account also has a ring of hysteria to it. Chapuis is claiming that Wolsey was poisoned at the end to finish him off quicker, or that he took something himself with that intent. A version of this second story was a rumour doing the rounds at Europe's courts soon after the Cardinal's death, and we hear it again on the 14th of December from Sebastian Giustinian, who told the Signory of Venice that the English ambassador, Sir Francis Bryan, has announced the death of Cardinal Wolsey. He meditated escape to Scotland when the king desired his chamberlain to arrest him, so he went with 1,500 horse, the cardinal having 300. When they met, the chamberlain desired him to dismiss his retinue, as he was the king's prisoner. The cardinal requested a delay of 2 days, and taking from his pouch a phial containing a certain electuary, he swallowed it and died. Now we could read this in one of 2 ways, and they put entirely different spins on Wolsey's death. An electuary, according to my research, was a medicinal substance mixed with honey or another sweet substance. So perhaps Giustinian is just saying that Wolsey took some dodgy medicine with good intentions, but it killed him. He could also be insinuating, of course, that the death was deliberate. It doesn't help that his story is full of other inaccuracies, which makes his general credibility poor. We know that 1,500 horse were not sent to get Wolsey, for instance, and there's no indication he was about to flee to Scotland. We should remember that the cardinal was deeply unpopular too, so even if Giustinian was insinuating a deliberate death, it might be that that rumour was floating about simply because it constituted a final insult from Wolsey's enemies in an era when that act was considered a mortal sin that would send you straight downstairs, if you know what I mean. The fact that this story was prevalent, though, helps to explain why Hall would later claim too that taking too many purgatives had finished off the cardinal. As well as the quote I already gave you, he also said that very feebleness of nature caused by purgations and vomits killed him. Now, I could believe that taking 16th century medications hastened his end, but I find it a much greater leap to suppose that he took something to deliberately do so. None of these men were present at Wolsey's death, and none provide any direct source for their information, nor is there any evidence from those who were with Wolsey to support it. I suspect, though, that these rumours were the basis of the TV show The Tudor's decision to show Wolsey finishing himself off. Regarding Chapuis in particular, I know he is a very popular person to turn to for information on the Henrican court, and he is often very good too, but he was known to repeat rumours when first-hand information was unavailable, and it's important not to view him as gospel, especially as he liked to claim poison when a crystal-clear alternative cause of death was not forthcoming. He would do it again in 1536 when Catherine of Aragon died, for instance, and I'll leave my episodes all about her death and whether I think she was murdered linked for you. Some relatively early historians, like Raphael Holinshed and John Stowe, just shamelessly plagiarised George Cavendish, and as such provide nothing of any value to add to what I've already told you. In fact, when I was reading their books and realising that I was wasting my time with them, it reminded me of what happens when other YouTubers steal my ideas and research. Sybil M. Jack, however, who wrote Wolsey's entry in the Oxford DMB, gave the following neat little summary of what might have killed the cardinal. The well-known portrait shows a man grossly overweight, but although he was frequently accused of greed, this usually meant avarice for possessions, and only Skelton accused him of gluttony. At first, Wolsey had been a robustly healthy man, but as he aged, he suffered from the stone, perhaps gallstones rather than kidney stones, jaundice, fevers, throat infections and colic, and latterly from oedema, localized dropsy. His sickness grew worse after his fall, meaning his fall from royal favour, so that he lost his appetite and slept badly. He also suffered several times from the sweat. In the last 2 or 3 years of his life, moreover, he underwent several moments of near collapse, though skilled medical attention enabled him to recover from them. Adult-onset diabetes seems a possible diagnosis. Even then easily identifiable, it was often linked to looseness of the bowels, which were commonly termed dysentery. doctors knew at least some of the dietary measures which could help to control it. They also knew that failure to eat regularly was dangerous. Wolsey's refusal to eat after his arrest and his subsequent dysentery and vomiting are reported by the Venetian ambassador. For a man in such a condition, a diabetic coma would be a likely consequence. Whatever the cause, it seems to have been natural enough, and I think we can rule out poison. With the cardinal dead, Kingston sent word to the king, and then spoke to Cavendish and the abbot to decide how to go about burying this once great man. Wolsey had, in better times, commissioned an elaborate tomb for himself from Benedetto da Rovezzano, which was not yet complete in 1530, though the sarcophagus and its base had been created. They were seized by Henry VIII for his own use, but that didn't happen, and instead they eventually ended up being used for the body of Horatio Nelson, died 1805, and now sit in the crypt in St Paul's Cathedral in London, because waste not, want not. Without the tomb available, and given that Wolsey had died at Leicester, it was decided to inter him there. And by the by, the fact that he was buried inside a Catholic church also pours cold water on the idea that he deliberately poisoned himself, as that would have prohibited a burial in such a place. The date of the funeral was set for the following day, but in the meantime it was thought a wise precaution to have the mayor of Leicester and his brethren come to see the body, so that no one could claim that Wolsey had somehow faked it. In preparation for this viewing and for burial, the body was removed from the bed in which he had died, at which point it was discovered that Wolsey was wearing, quote, a shirt of hair besides his other shirt, which was of very fine linen Holland cloth. This shirt of hair was unknown to all his servants, being continually attending upon him in his bedchamber, except to his chaplain, which was his ghostly father, wherein he was buried and laid in a coffin of boards, having upon his dead corpse all such vestures and ornaments as he was professed in when he was consecrated bishop and archbishop, as mitre, crosses, ring, and pall, with all other things appurtenant to his profession. And lying thus all day in his coffin, open and barefaced, that all men might see him lie there dead without feigning. That when the mayor, his brethren, and all other had seen him, lying thus until 4 or 5 of the clock at night, he was carried so down into the church with great solemnity by the abbot and convent, with many torches light, singing such service as is done for such funerals. And being in the church, the corpse was set in Our Lady Chapel, with many and divers tapers of wax burning about the hearse, and divers poor men sitting about the same, holding of torches light in their hands, who watched about the dead body all night, whilst the canons sang Dirige and other devout orisons. And about 4 o'clock in the morning they sang mass. And that done, and the body interred, Master Kingston, with us, being his servants, were present at his said funeral, and offered at his mass. And by that time all things were finished, and all ceremonies that to such a person were decent and convenient. It was about 6 of the clock in the morning. So Wolsey was buried at Leicester Abbey less than 24 hours after his death in a respectable funeral, though not one as big as it would have been if he'd still been in Henry's good books. What else do we know about his grave, though? Edward Hall says only that having arrived at Leicester, he died the 2nd night following, and in the same abbey lieth buried. There is no mention of a visible tomb or marked grave of any kind. Agostino Scarpinello said that he was put into the earth in the place where he died some 6 hours afterwards, which doesn't tally in terms of the timeline of events with Cavendish and would barely have allowed time for the body to be viewed and a grave dug. Eustace Chapuis wrote that the Cardinal of York died on St Andrew's Day, at a place where King Richard was killed. They are both buried in the same church, which the people call the Tyrant's Sepulchre. Now, of course, Richard III's grave was spectacularly rediscovered in Leicester in 2012, so we know exactly where the church that he was buried in was. However, unfortunately, this is another instance of Chapuis getting his facts wrong. The 2 men were not interred in the same building. Richard III was buried in the Greyfriars in the city, see my episode on his corpse to learn how the location of his burial was lost for so long, Wolsey, as you've heard, was buried in Leicester Abbey. What happened to Leicester Abbey after 1530, though, and how was knowledge of the place where this infamous historical figure was interred lost? Initially, Henry seemed keen to take care of the grave of his former favourite. In the letters and papers of his reign for November 1530, we find an entry for expenses for the perpetual memory of Wolsey, which reads as follows: for 2 chantries, £26, 13 shillings 4d. For alms yearly, £10. For 3 commemorations yearly, £15. For the ministers of the church at each commemoration, estimated, £10. For the ministers of the church on the day of the anniversary, £11. For ringing the bells, £26 8d. For pittance, £10. If these good intentions were carried out, though, they didn't last long. As you may know, later in the 1530s, still unable to obtain a papal annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII broke from the church in Rome, dissolved the monasteries in his realm, and plundered their wealth. Leicester was no exception, and it was closed in 1538. After Henry had stripped it bare, it was offloaded onto a Mr. Cavendish, not to be confused with George Cavendish, then passed to the Marquis of Northampton, brother of Catherine Parr, if anyone's interested, then to the Earl of Huntingdon during the reign of Elizabeth I. It then came back to the Cavendish family, by now the Earls and Countesses of Devonshire. Over time, it had also become a ruin. It's even more so today. And with apparently no marker on the Wolsey grave and the removal from the abbey just a few years after his death of the monks who had lived there and who would have remembered burying him, it is little wonder that the exact location of the Cardinal's grave was lost so fast. Now, there is a story published in the 1790s that during the civil wars in England, the Countess of Devonshire's gardener, a Mr. Arthur Barefoot, discovered the Cardinal's tomb. He then told this story to his grandson, presumably decades later, who related it to a Mr. Cart, presumably years if not decades after that, who at some stage told an historian named Thoresby, who published it. As you can see, it's an absolutely ludicrous chain of evidence stretching over 150 years. The details of the story are equally disappointing. Supposedly Barefoot and other men found some stone coffins, one of which he magically identified as Wolsey's, though conveniently the grandson couldn't recall how his grandpa had managed this incredible feat, because that's a crucial detail you just forget, right? The Countess of Devonshire was informed, but ordered that the coffin be reinterred, and that was that. The story is preposterous, there's no evidence to support it, and it is refuted by what we know of Wolsey's burial. Where exactly would a stone coffin have come from, for instance? Cavendish, Chapuis and Hall mention no such thing, and it would be an expensive item that wouldn't just be lying around in case someone famous died at the Abbey unexpectedly. Nor would there have been time to get one, as Wolsey was buried the day after he died, remember. Furthermore, George Cavendish's account specifically states that Wolsey was laid in a coffin of boards, not of stone. I'm sorry, but this is just one of those fantasy stories told by people who wanted to get attention and pretend they were special or that their grandfather was. Whatever digging may have gone on in the past, the Abbey ruins have certainly been excavated by professionals in more modern times too. They were dug between 2000 and 2005, for instance, by University of Leicester undergraduate students as part of their supervised training, and the information collected was compiled into a 2006 book, Leicester Abbey, Medieval History, Archaeology and Manuscript Studies. They didn't find Wolsey though. The discovery of Richard III, so close by, sparked a conversation about searching for him again, with one local Leicester City councillor telling the BBC in 2013 that he wanted Leicester University, who discovered Richard, to work with the council on a new search, this time for the Cardinal. I think this guy, though well-meaning, was getting a bit overexcited though, and didn't really understand the challenges of what he was suggesting. Even if the site was excavated again, and we found a male skeleton of about the right age and time period, how would we prove it's Wolsey and not some random monk? Although he had 2 illegitimate children, good luck trying to find any descendants today. Assuming his mistress didn't lie about the paternity of those offspring, the daughter became a nun, and the son a financially straitened churchman. There is no evidence that either produced any offspring, and I'm unaware of any Wolsey siblings whose descendants could be traced in the way that Richard III's sister's descendants were found. We therefore lack any DNA to compare to any found at Leicester Abbey, and that's assuming you could even get DNA from his bones or teeth, which is a big if. Nor would his skeleton have the kind of distinctive battle damage, not to mention curved spine, that Richard III's did, and which tipped off those who found him to his identity even before carbon dating and DNA analysis confirmed it. Instead, we'd be reliant on finding him with some slam-dunk grave goods that prove it's him. Now, as I've said, Cavendish did note that he was laid out with, quote, all such vestures and ornaments as he was professed in when he was consecrated bishop and archbishop, as mitre, crosses, ring, and pall, with all other things pertinent to his profession. It's therefore also insinuated that he was buried with them. If a few of the hardier objects, like the ring perhaps, survived, that might help with an identification. But there will be other prominent churchmen buried under the abbey who worked there and who could conceivably be buried with such items too. If that story about stone coffins being found in the mid-17th century is true, then that alone proves that there were numerous other high-status burials in the abbey who could be confused for the cardinals. Basically, even if someone did stumble across Thomas Wolsey's earthly remains, we'd have a hard job knowing it was him. And that brings us to the end of another episode all about death and corpses, which is something of a speciality of mine. Just to let you know before I go that you can buy my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors, online from Amazon if you have Irish ancestry, and I've left that linked below for you. Let me know in the comments what you think the chances are that Wolsey could be found and identified. I know I'm pessimistic about it, but maybe you're more of an optimist. For your next video, I think you'll love my episode about the disappearance of Queen Catherine Howard's remains. Unlike Wolsey, we know exactly where she should be, but when the Victorians went a digging, she wasn't there. Alternatively, check out my musings on whether Catherine of Aragon was murdered. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.